Continuing on with my 12-part rookie profile series for the 2022 class, we are moving on to my second ranked rookie, my 1.02 in one quarterback leagues, and probably my 1.03 in superflex leagues. Also, my wide receiver one in this class, and that is Drake London, wide receiver out of USC. And I know this is not the consensus rookie wide receiver one in this class. Trust me, we'll get to him very soon. But London checks way more of my boxes than anybody else in this class. But first, let's look at what he did collegiately. He came into USC in 2019 as a very young 18-year-old, being only 18 and a couple months when his freshman season began. He was the wide receiver 4 on that team that year behind Michael Pittman, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Tyler Vaughns, who was just basically a consistent wide receiver 3 for them for a couple years prior to 2019. So with that role, he caught 39 receptions for 567 yards and 5 touchdowns, which honestly is a very good freshman year behind 2 very good NFL wide receivers as well. And in fact, he had a higher dominator rating in his freshman year than Treylon Burks did in his freshman year. Moving on to 2020 sophomore year, Michael Pittman is gone, so it's just the sun god Amon-Ra St. Brown and Drake London, and then Vaughns again as the wide receiver 3. This was also the COVID years, I'm sure you guys remember. So USC only played 6 games, and in those 6 games, London put up 502 yards and 3 touchdowns on 32 receptions. In a normal 12-game season, you can just basically just double those numbers. He would have been a 1,000-yard receiver, had 6 touchdowns as well, which was also equal to Amon-Ra St. Brown's sophomore year. Then his junior year, 2021, this past year, no Amon-Ra St. Brown, and it's all Drake London. He put up 1,084 yards and 7 touchdowns on 88 receptions, playing only in 7.5 games because he fractured his ankle in the second quarter in week 8 against Arizona. But before that injury, he was absolutely on fire all year long. He had 5 games with double-digit receptions, 6 games with 130 yards or more, and in the game that he got injured, he already had 9 receptions for 81 yards and 2 touchdowns with 4 minutes left in the first half. Over a 12-game pace, that would have put London at 132 receptions, 1,626 yards, and 10 to 11 touchdowns. And that's assuming that he didn't catch another ball at all in the rest of that Arizona game. And just for reference, those receptions and yardage totals are both higher than Justin Jefferson's final season at LSU with Joe Burrow. And I'm not saying that Drake London is Justin Jefferson or he's better than Justin Jefferson. I just wanted to put a little bit of a perspective into how ridiculous Drake London was producing last year at USC. So now it's time to get into the analytics, and like the marker system I presented in the previous video with Breece Hall, I have a similar methodology for wide receivers. And again, this is not some fancy model or machine learning algorithm or anything like that that just spits out my final rankings, no questions asked. Instead, this marker system is basically just a series of checkboxes or baselines that I need to see these players hit, and those checkboxes were created based on what previous successful wide receivers did collegiately. So for wide receivers, I have 12 markers that I want to see these players hit, and they are first and second round draft capital, an age of 20 or 21 years old when they start their rookie year, you need to be 6 foot or taller, a 26 plus BMI, a sub 4.6 40-yard dash, which then also means a 100 plus speed score. And then looking at the production in college, I'm looking for an 18 or 19-year-old 20% breakout age, an 18, 19, or 20-year-old 30% breakout age, a best market share of receiving yards season at 30% or higher, a first season yards per team pass attempt of 1.5 or higher, a best yards per team pass attempt of 2.5 or higher, and a final season yards per team pass attempt of 2 or higher. And then at the end of it, I also have a final draft capital adjustment that just moves players up or down with the markers even more depending on what round they were drafted in. So that really just adds in additional weight to draft capital a little bit more. But those are my 12 markers for wide receivers, and I realized when I introduced these that I might need to define a few things. So number one, market share of yards is just a player's total receiving yards divided by the team's total passing yards. So it gives you a nice percentage there. You might be familiar with like target share from the NFL, which is basically just a player's market share of targets. We just call it target share. Number two, yards per team pass attempt is exactly how it sounds. You take a player's receiving yards, divide it by the team's total pass attempts. So for example, if you caught 600 receiving yards and your team threw it 300 times, your yards per team pass attempt would just be 600 divided by 300, which is 2. Number 3, dominator rating is a simple formula that basically just describes how much of your team's total production came from you as a single player. And the formula is pretty simple. It's just market share of yards plus market share of touchdowns, all of that divided by 2. So just a fancy way of saying the average of the two percentages. And then finally, breakout age is the player's age in the first season that he hit a dominator rating threshold. And in my markers, I'm looking for both a 20% and 30% breakout age, which means the first season that a player had a 20% dominator rating and the first season that he had a 30% dominator rating. The default threshold is usually 20%, but the reason why I also include 30% is because it's been found that 30% threshold nets you a better ability to find elite NFL wide receivers based on what they did in college. Okay, so with all of that out of the way, let's take a look at Drake London's profile using this marker system, because he currently comes in tied for first in this class with 9 out of the 12 markers hit, which is tied with Wan'Dale Robinson, Sky Moore, David Bell, and Khalil Shakir. However, because of his ankle injury, London did not run a 40-yard dash at the combine like the other wide receivers. So I'm actually missing data for him on the 40-yard dash and his speed score. But at his size, he just needs to be faster than 4.57 to hit both the 40-yard dash and the speed score markers and become an 11 out of 12 player right before the draft. So then all we need is first or second round draft capital, and that'll make him a complete 12 out of 12 marker kind of player and the only player in this class to do that. And I did say that I have a draft capital adjustment at the end as well. So depending on what round you're taking in, it goes up or down. And if he is a first round pick, he will enter an elite tier that only 11 other wide receivers since 2001 have hit. And that list includes guys like Calvin Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, Mike Evans, who London is so commonly comped to, Amari Cooper, and Des Bryant. Now, there are complete busts like N'Keal Harry, Kenny Britt, Reggie Williams, and Sammy Watkins to an extent as well on there too. But overall, this is where you want to be as a wide receiver. And at second round draft capital, he's still in elite company with guys like Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, Odell Beckham Jr., Justin Jefferson, Demaryius Thomas. So as long as he ends up in that first or second round draft capital, he is in an elite tier of wide receivers already to begin with. One of the biggest issues I have seen people have with Drake London was his size. They say that he's too tall, but he's too skinny and he won't succeed in the NFL based on previous historical comps to his height and weight. But a lot of that went away a little bit from the combine when, I mean, surprise, surprise, USC listed him bigger than he actually was. He's still, though, 6'4", nearly 220 pounds. And that's a very good size, prototypical sized wide receiver. And at that size, with his production, draft capital, and in my opinion, a projected speed slower than 4.45, his comp list based on history is very, very, very good because it's Larry Fitzgerald, Demaryius Thomas, Allen Robinson, Alshon Jeffrey, Cortland Sutton, and then James Hardy. That is a fantastic list to be a part of with a few perennial wide receiver ones in Larry Fitzgerald and Demaryius Thomas, and up until last year, basically Allen Robinson as well. Alshon Jeffrey even had 2 top 10 seasons with the Chicago Bears. So I absolutely love everything about Drake London, and he is 100% my wide receiver 1 in this class. The last thing I want to discuss is potential landing spot for London to bring out the best of him in fantasy football. And London is pretty consistently mocked as a first round pick and is actually averaging either the second or third receiver off the board in most mocks. And while there are a bunch of teams that he could go to and immediately start as the wide receiver 2 or even wide receiver 1 on that team, I think the best spot for him though is the Las Vegas Raiders, where he can come in and just immediately be the wide receiver 2 on the team, if not honestly a more prototypical wide receiver 1, because he'll be the main outside wide receiver with Hunter Renfrow working in the slot. And the Raiders need a real presence outside with Henry Ruggs out of the picture. Bryan Edwards just ain't it. Zay Jones now has signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars, so all they have is Hunter Renfrow and a soon-to-be 30-year-old Darren Waller. Derek Carr is a good quarterback. He can absolutely support Drake London as a wide receiver 2, if not better. I mean, Zay Jones and Bryan Edwards' stats last year combined would have been 80 for 1,104, which is a back-end wide receiver 2. The only problem that I have is I don't know if London is going to be there when the Raiders pick at 22 overall, but I would love to see it. I think that's the best landing spot for Drake London right now. Another team in a similar boat is the New Orleans Saints, because right now it is Alvin Kamara, maybe Michael Thomas, and then basically nothing else. Yes, they don't have a quarterback right now, but with an opportunity for immediate targets in that offense, the quarterback doesn't matter all too much to be able to support Drake London for fantasy. However, very similar to the Vegas Raiders, I am a tiny bit concerned that the Saints don't have the chance to draft him at 18 overall as well. The final team that I would like more than others to land London is the Atlanta Falcons, who are even more desperate for weapons than both the Raiders and the Saints. With Calvin Ridley suspended for the 2022 season, I mean, they basically have nothing else outside of Kyle Pitts right now, and they need an outside weapon just to have a functioning offense. Fun fact, Russell Gage was the wide receiver 12 in fantasy last year from weeks 9 through 18. So basically the entire time that Calvin Ridley was gone from the team, Russell Gage went right into that role as a wide receiver 1 for fantasy over the back half of the season. That is the kind of opportunity that Drake London could walk into immediately on the Atlanta Falcons with Matt Ryan still at the helm. However, the problem with the Atlanta Falcons is kind of the opposite of the Raiders and the Saints, in that I don't know if they would pull that trigger that early because they are sitting at 8 overall. But if they do, I will absolutely love it. But like I said, there are a lot of other teams that I would like to see him with, or at least he'd have good opportunities that need wide receivers. Cleveland, Philly, they have 3 picks in the team, so they could use any one of them on Drake London. New England, Dallas is a little bit later in the first, but I could see them pulling that trigger now. Even Minnesota as an Adam Thielen replacement down the road could be awesome for Drake London. So that is my breakdown of my second ranked rookie, Drake London, in this class. Make sure you hit that like button to let me know that you guys love Drake London as much as I do. And be sure to hit that subscribe button if you are not yet subscribed to get more content from the DLF YouTube channel as we continue on through the rookie season. And if you missed my previous video on Breece Hall, you can click right up here and watch that video. And with that all being said, guys, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch y'all later.